Well, hey everybody, welcome to the Tree.Church Bible Study. My name is Chris Reed, and I'm Director of Biblical Education here at the Tree. And it is an honor and privilege to be back with you on the Tree.Church Bible Study. It's been a couple weeks, got to enjoy some time with my family on vacation, but I'm really excited to be back. We have a great episode in store for you today. We kind of get away from some of the stranger topics that we've been talking about, and we are moving on to what seems and feels like a little bit more like normal topics. I'll just say it that way. But it's a great conversation. We're joined today by Pastor Matthew, Pastor Michael, and we have a good time laying this conversation out for you. So please stay tuned as we jump into Deuteronomy Chapter 26.
The Wellness Series Parenting Workshop is coming up on July 23rd at 10 o'clock a.m. This workshop will provide parents with support and practical strategies to build emotional intelligence within children of all ages. Through this 90-minute workshop, parents will engage in conversations and exercises that will help them better grow their children socially, emotionally, and intellectually. Visit our app to register.
Well, hey everybody, welcome back to the Tree.Church Bible Study. My name is Chris Reed, and I'm one of the pastors here at the Tree.Church. Today, I am joined by Pastor Matthew.
Hey, good to be here.
And Pastor Michael. How are we doing today, guys?
Yeah, thanks for having me, man.
Well, it's been a minute since I've been able to do this, so Pastor Matthew, thank you for filling in for the weeks that I've been off here.
You know, Chris, I didn't even tell you this. I learned something. I didn't realize that being the host meant you did like prep work and you did notes and stuff. And so like the day of the first one I had to do, Phil Venrick, he texted me. It's like, when can Tiff and I expect the notes? And I was like, what notes?
What are you talking about?
So all of this, but this is what I discovered. I feel awful about this. I didn't realize you were sending out notes to us for the Bible study. So I'm doing all my own research, not realizing even that Chris had done some stuff.
Nice.
So when you would ask us questions, like it really was my honest response, because I was like, I'd never heard these questions before. And so like when he said that, I started going back and looking, and I was like,
wait a minute.
Yeah, I was like, do I feel like an idiot? I am so sorry. So I was like, Phil, I will get you those notes ASAP.
And, on it.
No, and I never really gave you kind of like, hey, this is what I do. I thought you've looked at them before, so I was like,
you know,
I thought you were kind of keyed into that.
Yeah,
but
to be fair, I have, but I thought I was looking at like your private notes.
Oh, okay.
You know what I mean? So like you had shared them with me, and so I always had in my mind, you did your work, we were supposed to do our work.
Sure.
Yeah.
And so that was just my mindset of like, yeah, we all did our own studies, and if you don't have enough time, you can look at Chris's notes who are more thorough and stuff.
Yeah.
But I didn't realize like that was a part of the process, so I felt so bad, and so I worked on it, sent them out, and then I was like, now I feel like a jerk to Chris because he's doing all this work and I'm not engaging it. But
no, after doing the first couple, I threw some questions out there, and I felt like I was throwing you guys off, like, because I was just asking you questions, what was kind of on the fly. And so I was like, well, I'm going to do some work and try to get some questions, get some questions out ahead of time so you guys can look at them.
I love that Phil's default response, though, wasn't like, I'm not doing that. Like, what are you going to, like Matthew's like, all right, I got to be thorough. Phil's like, you going to hook me up? Like,
yeah.
So I told him, I said, Matthew does his own notes. He typically doesn't put them in the show notes, so maybe you can reach out to him and ask him.
And he did.
So, well, all right. Well, let's jump into kind of the fun questions, and then we'll get going into Deuteronomy chapter 26, which I need to acknowledge. We are finally entering into a somewhat seemingly normal set of passages today.
We got through it.
Yeah.
No more weird laws. And I should say I looked at next week's, and we're back at it for just a minute.
Oh,
but
gosh.
Yeah.
I think we're kind of wrapping up at the end of what's considered the book of the law.
So we basically had 5 weeks of oddness.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
Okay.
Really hyper-specific situations.
So today's normal, and today we're going to talk about tithing. So
Nice. What a break.
So it's going to be a break. To kick us off, let's just start with just a couple fun questions. What's the weirdest food that you've ever eaten?
Yeah, for me, very easy answer, nothing. So I'm like the most unadventurous, picky eater, I mean, of anybody that I know. Like I'm the kind of person that can eat the same exact meal every day for lunch and never complain about it. And it's not even that I don't even know what it is. Like my response if we go out to eat and Gina's like, oh, you should try this thing. It's like the stuff that I like hasn't stopped tasting good. Like,
right,
like why roll the dice and try? Because what if I don't like that? I'm going to waste money and like I don't like it. And I'm the picky. I can't. When I read that question, I was like, I don't think I have an answer. I've got nothing.
Yeah, Michael is speaking my language too, because you know I probably maybe am a tad bit more adventurous than you because of my wife. But I have said to her numerous times and been ignored. Every single time I've said this, I've told her, like, if you picked it, so like Monday night was Sloppy Joe night, Tuesday was hamburger, Wednesday was spaghetti, I would be totally cool. Be
happy as a
like,
clam.
yeah. Because I even like today we all went out to lunch to celebrate a staff member's birthday, and we went to Mongolian barbecue. And Mary just leaned over to me. She's like, "Did you get your usual?" And I said, "Yeah, I have gotten the same thing."
Yeah, watch the tone. Yes, I did.
Right. Probably 20 times in a row. I have not wavered from that.
Yeah.
And I told her today, I go, actually, I kind of spiced it up. And she was like, "Oh yeah." I was like, "Yeah, I put kosher salt on it. Like, I don't salt my food." And so I just thought, like, I'll try it to see.
Try
if
something
it,
new. Let's feel a little crazy.
Oh,
So
man.
I don't really eat a lot of weird things, but I will say this: Mary and I went to Pittsburgh one time. We went to a concert there. And when we were there, we decided to eat at an Indian food restaurant, and all of our friends like it and had recommended, and so we went and tried it. And our waitress was like, "What level do you want the heat at for the food?" Talking about the spice, and I was like, I can handle spicy stuff. I don't love really spicy stuff. I can handle it. So I was like 5. Like let's go in the middle. I go, "What's the scale?" She goes 1 to 10. I go 5, and she kind of did like this, and Mary goes, like, "What is that a lot?" She's like, "Well, I mean, 5 for us is, like that's gonna be high for you." And I was like, "Should I do 4?" And she was like, "Yeah, maybe do 4." I tell you, that was a 9 in my world. Like,
man.
so like it was good, like great flavor. But I was I'm having lunch or dinner with my wife, somewhat romantic. We're on a getaway weekend, and I'm sweating like I'm doing CrossFit. Like it is just pouring down. And the waitress came over and she's like, "You okay?" And I'm like, "I am."
Yeah, great. Thanks for the 4.
It was good, but it was just like I was not prepared for that. So that's probably the craziest thing I've ever had.
What does 10 taste like? Or
That's
what
right. Yeah,
goodness
that's right.
gracious. What does that mean?
I thought, what is a 6, 7? Like at that point,
Is it right that Mary, that I heard her say once, that there's genuinely not a food she wouldn't try or wouldn't even like or something crazy like that?
Yeah, she's completely different than me. She can name one food that she's like, I don't love that. Like that's her perspective.
That's so wild.
But she's like, everything else I can eat, and I'm totally fine with it. So she really is. She loves experimenting, trying new things. So when we go to a restaurant, it's the the typical thing where she has to look at the menu. Like, so the waitress comes over, and I'm of the mindset like, let's do our drink orders and food order at the same time, right? Like if in the ideal world. And Mary's like, we're gonna need a few minutes, and then they come back. She's like, we're gonna need a few more. And every time she says it, I'm like, oh, but she just wants to look at what the options are.
Yeah,
so.
for me, I just ask, what's beige? I'll have what's beige and what has a lot of fat and butter, and I'll take that.
You could do gruel then.
Yeah, I'd
right?
love it, probably. Yeah.
I'm pretty adventurous when it comes to food. Although I'll say it this way: I won't say the weirdest food that I've ever eaten. The weirdest food I've ever passed up on, and this is to the level that you got to get for me to kind of pass up on it. My brother-in-law had gone to a Japanese food market this past weekend, and he brought back these little bag of dried crabs, and they're like little tiny crabs, still in the same shape as a crab, whole, and they're dried. And he's like, they taste like potato chips. I'm like, I'm gonna take your word on it. So
Do you just eat it whole?
Yeah, you just eat them. You just grab it in the bag.
Its head, its legs, its bones,
everything. Yeah,
That's too much.
that's where I was. I was like,
texture,
But even for like it tastes like potato chips. My response is like, well, I'll have a potato chip.
Exactly.
Are we running out of potatoes? Like, why do I need to go to this weird version?
Was it you that had some crazy things in China?
Yeah.
China, right?
Yeah, I had some crazy food in China. Although no, I didn't have as crazy of an experience as some other people. Like somebody ate a duck egg that they cook by burying it in the ground and just letting it age. I think a former employee of ours that worked for you did that one time.
That just sounds like something going rotten.
Sent him straight to the bathroom.
Did it really?
Oh yeah,
I believe it. Yeah, again,
Yeah.
that sounds like a rotten egg, dude.
Yeah,
But you really like the food in China, right?
Oh, I love the food
You
in
talked about
China.
that was some of your favorite you've ever had.
Yep. Food in China was really good. I watched another former employee that we traveled with eat a chicken foot. Like,
Yeah, that's
like
what
it
I
was
had in
in
my
the.
mind.
Yeah, I didn't do that. I had the intestine from the pig that was there.
Well,
and
that's pretty gross.
Like,
That's pretty tough.
so.
You know what's weird about it? Like, I don't want to get too deep in the conversation, but it's like it's interesting how they use every part of the body when like we're as Americans we're like, nah.
We're a little more pretentious
And even,
about it.
have you? I think there's a documentary on this of Americans don't eat ugly food, and so like
probably fair.
if bananas or anything just look ugly, they stay on the shelf. Where like other cultures are just like, it's just bananas,
banana.
right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
so any food that's that way.
That's
but
super interesting.
yeah, I know. I mean, I'll be the first one to say I'm that way. Like you look. if something looks kind of weird,
totally.
you're like,
Why not?
pass that.
That is a God-given natural response to something. If it doesn't look like it should be eaten, you probably shouldn't eat it.
Yeah. I'll
Like
leave that right
that's
where
a
it's at.
safety mechanism
Right.
that God
Like
gave
a
us.
chicken foot, hard pass.
Doesn't look edible.
That feels like that should be in Deuteronomy. Don't eat the foot of a chicken.
Yeah. And if you do,
Be outside the camp for a
Right.
month.
Okay, so another question. If you could live anywhere in the world for a year, where would it be? Michael, why don't you start us?
that's a really good question. For me, I'd probably, like, assuming like your job's on hold, like perfect situation, like,
Yeah,
no
100%.
giant social consequences, anything like that.
Yeah.
Probably Ireland. My family's largely from Ireland, and I love like that culture, and I love that group of people, and I love the music. I grew up, my mom just constantly playing Irish folk music in our house. I've always been so fascinated. I've never been. So if I could go anywhere, probably a year just to really understand, like, I don't know, some of the older people in my family and where they came from and why they act the way they do, just to see it firsthand. I think that'd be pretty cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
For me, it'd probably be Kansas. I'm just kidding. Just think of the flattest
Really?
state. No, for me, two
Nebraska.
places, and even as I say this, if my wife watches this Bible study, she'll be like, "What? Like, you've never said this." The more I see about Iceland, the more incredibly beautiful it is.
Yeah.
So again, if what Michael's saying, if there's no consequence, because
Right.
obviously, like right now, I don't want my family to be with me and all that kind of stuff. That would be one part, or the other would just be a very beautiful island like Hawaii or
that'd
something
be
like
cool.
that, because I really do get refreshed that way. I just don't know, for a year, I feel like I would get bored at
sick of it.
that part. But like Iceland. Iceland almost seems fake to me when I see pictures and videos of it. It feels like, you watch a movie about like other planets and it feels like
Totally.
computer generated graphics, and you're like,
Yeah.
that's what Iceland feels like to me. The more I
Yeah.
see, there's a couple of like really big CrossFitters that are from there, and if you like watch any documentaries on them and they show the land, you're like, what is this mystical place that you
beautiful.
guys live? Yeah,
Yeah.
it's so gorgeous.
My childhood best, he's still one of my best friends, Tyler. Him and his wife just spent a couple weeks in Iceland, and the pictures he sent me, for everything from the architecture to how they build things, is like, to what it just naturally looks like. You think Iceland, it sounds like the most boring place in the world, of like, oh, it's cold, probably a lot of ice.
Yeah.
Great. No, gorgeous. Crazy. Yeah.
Looks beautiful. I would say I'm kind of along the lines with you, Michael. I would love to spend a year in Oxford. I would love to live there for a while. For one,
You'd be going to the libraries.
yeah, going to the library, some of the greatest minds in the world. You got
Boring.
Is there stuff not on the internet?
We got libraries here. We got the
You're
same books.
close to Ireland, so you can go and
Sure.
explore Ireland. You're close to Scotland, you can go and explore Scotland, and also you're close to. You could travel and go to Europe and just
That's a good
spend,
point.
like
You know what,
You're so
Chris?
practical.
You, in my mind, you fit in Ireland. You really do. Like, I can see you
or
as a person.
Scotland. I could see you in
Yeah.
either place.
Yeah.
It'd be a good place for you.
Yeah, I just think it's beautiful. I don't want to live in a city, so like maybe Oxford. I'd like to visit Oxford, but
Sure.
like to live in Northern Ireland for a year, it would be
that'd be pretty cool.
Or Northern Scotland would be awesome. So, all right, let's jump into the passage. We're going to be looking at Deuteronomy chapter 26, and we're just going to start in verse 1 and go through verse 4 here, and then we'll stop and take a break and talk a little bit about what's going on. So when you come into the land that the Lord your God has given you for an inheritance and have taken possession of it and live in it, you shall take some of the first fruit of all of the ground, which you harvest from your land that the Lord your God is giving you. And you shall put it in a basket, and you shall go to the place that the Lord your God will choose to make his name dwell there. And you shall go to the priest who is in office at the time and say to him, I declare today to the Lord your God that I have come into the land and that the Lord swore to our fathers to give us. Then the priest shall take the basket from your hand and set it down before the altar of the Lord your God. So let's just stop there real quick. And we have to remember, context here is Moses has brought the people of God to the edge of the promised land. They're getting ready to go in. And so you see kind of a futuristic, kind of a looking forward for when God gives you what he's promised to give you, essentially is what he's saying. When you do that, what I want you to do is I want you to take from the first fruit of your land. So let's explore that just a little bit. And I know we've talked about it in the past, but Matthew, could you explain a little bit what first fruit giving is, and maybe just some of the implication of why that might be an important thing for them to do, being on the cusp of coming into the land that God has given them?
Yeah, I mean, I this is a topic I love talking about, and I think at times churches can get a really bad reputation. It's completely unfair. It really is about all they care about is money, and that's such a weird perspective. This isn't even what you asked. Okay, so I'm going on a little, but a weird perspective in the sense that if a church had the money that it needed to accomplish the vision, they would never have to talk about money, and yet we still would, because the Bible talks about money. There's like a deeper heart issue to it, so that there's always like this negative implication, and there's a negative like underlying tension of saying, basically, you talk about money because you want to be rich. You know, it's like this weird, no one says it, but that's what they think. But that's not it at all. There's like this really beautiful, deep principle about finances that we see over and over in Scripture. So when you first look at the idea of first fruits, you need to just stop and take a step back and go, okay, who's commanding this? God. Does God need anything? No. So the phrase I use all the time with our church is, a God who is able to speak everything out of nothing will never be in need of anything. So God never commands something because somehow it's going to better him or even provide for something that he lacks or what the church would lack. So when we do that, we go, okay, so let's take a step back. Why does God command this? And we look at it from the very beginning. When God delivers them out of Egypt, it's like Exodus 12. Like I think it's, don't quote me on this, but I think it's like Exodus 11 is the Passover, they're leaving. Exodus 12, he goes, like you again, picture the whole image of it, like 3 million people packing up all of their lives to become mobile, to go, just the chaos of that moment. And God goes, this is the perfect opportunity to tell Moses, to tell all the people, hey, FYI, the firstborn belong to me, of man and of animal. So like the man you're gonna sacrifice in their place, because we don't believe in human sacrifice, this is God. And God said, but the animal you sacrifice to me. And you go, what? Of all the timing in the world. But why? God was saying, I never want you guys to forget this principle. I'm the one who provides for you. Right. So as they're walking out of deliverance, that's the background of God's command. And so every scripture that talks about finances, put it in context. Here's the context. God has delivered you. Right. So for this group, he delivered them out of slavery, and then says, I want the firstborn. So because the firstborn is the faith portion. Right. And so I'll come back to that in a second, but the context is always God's deliverance and promise for provision. All right, so you guys tracking with me? Like it's both sides of this. I'm delivering you out of something. I'm going to provide for you in the future, but here's the part you play in the middle. I want you to put me first. Right. So it's a reminder to our hearts and minds. It's not a reminder to God. Right. It's a reminder to our hearts and mind. He's the one who delivered us. He's the one that's going to provide for us. So when he asked for the firstborn, it was that principle. And now when he asks for the first fruits or commands the first fruits, it's that same thing. Because think about verse 1. When you come into the land that the Lord your God is giving you, what all has to happen before this moment? They're going to have to knock down 10 powerful nations. I think it's 10 or around there, 10 nations. Like Jericho will be first, and then there's going to be these other nations that are bigger than them, more developed than them. So in order for them to get to the place where they can even have crops and all of that, all these miracles have to happen. So God is going to deliver, God's going to provide, then they're going to plant their crops when the crops are blessed by God. But here's even the kicker too. This first fruits won't even be typically crops that they planted, because what God told them is, you're about to go into lands that are already developed. You're gonna sleep in houses and live in houses that you did not build. Right. You're gonna eat from bowls you didn't form. You're gonna drink from wells you didn't dig, and you're gonna eat from crops and vineyards that you didn't even plant. So God's just saying, remind your heart that I'm your deliverer and provider. And so that's the context in this that we can't forget, is that it's always for our minds and hearts. So like every single time I talk about giving, if anyone even wants to push back, I'm thinking, if you don't want to give, okay, then don't give. Yeah. But I'm telling you that the deeper principle is, when you give, you are inviting God's supernatural blessing into whatever you give him. Right. Give God your children. You're inviting his supernatural blessing. Give God your marriage. You're inviting his supernatural blessing. Give him your finances. You're inviting his supernatural blessing. And that's what he's saying here is the first fruits. So that's the last thing I want to end with. The firstborn and the first fruits are the faith portion. And that's the portion that, because there's no guarantee for the after. So like the first animal that comes out of the womb, when you give that to God, there's no guarantee there's a second animal or third or fourth. So by giving that, you're saying, here's in faith portion, I'm giving to you, God, believing you're going to provide second, third, fourth, which he's promised to do. In the first fruits, the same concept. The first part of harvest, you don't know what's going to happen. Locust could come, a tornado could come, there could be horrible weather, a drought could come in the process of that. And so by giving to God the first portion, a generous portion, you're saying, God, I'm inviting what you've always done. You've always delivered. You've always provided. And so I'm inviting your supernatural blessing into this. And that's what God wants. And so that's why he commands it over and over. The first portion, give me the first portion, because that is the faith portion. And like what Hebrews says, without faith, it is impossible to please God. And even in that verse, I love that verse. A friend of mine here in town actually was preaching a sermon on it this past Sunday. But he says, it's impossible to please God without faith, because a person of faith must believe that God will draw near to you and bless those who obey him.
Yeah.
Right.
Like there's the blessing portion of that. And
Yeah, I think humans also have a really bad habit of taking credit for things they also shouldn't take credit for. So that even the way you said it, of like, the nature of them walking into a promised land is the concept that they're walking into a land that was given to them, not earned.
Right.
Like God promised this to them due to their obedience and due to his generosity, not because of anything that they earned.
Look at how many times he says that God is given to you. God is giving to you.
Yeah,
Like, he
and what a
repeats it
great
over
way
and
to
over
make
again.
yourself remember that is like, all right, so the first of that land, the first fruit that comes from it is going to go to God, because it's all already his anyways.
Right.
I can stand on the shoulders of God's generosity and be like, look at what I built. But the reality is it all belongs to God. The reason why you have any of it at all is because God gave it to you. So in that is, we're talking specifically about the first fruits from that promised land, but that also applies to everything I have now, whether it be every dollar that I have in seasons where it feels challenging to give, or that I might not want to be as generous. I have to remind myself of like, this is all already God's. Like I can't look at any of this and say, look what I've done, look what I've built. I have what I have because of what God has given me. And so now it's my responsibility to steward over it in the best way possible. And he's given us a guideline of how to steward that in a way that keeps our heart in the right place, trusting exactly as Pastor Matthew said, that even giving up the first, even giving up the best, even giving up 10%, giving up an offering, giving up your tithe, whatever the case might be, trusting that he'll do more with what comes after, because that's how generous that God has always been. And I think all three of us can talk about countless times in life where we've seen that come to fruition. But it's just this great reminder of the fact that it's all already his. Like that's why the first matters. It's a great reminder.
And that's
of that.
why, I mean, we looked at, I think it's earlier on in Deuteronomy. I just quickly tried to find it. I couldn't. But where God tells them, he warns them, he goes, here's what's going to happen. You're going to go into the land, you're going to get arrogant.
Yep.
You're going to go, look what I have done. Look at the work of my hands.
Yep.
And he said, do not forget, it is God who gives you opportunity to make wealth.
Yeah.
And so like even for us, we have a very arrogant posture, can have an arrogant, not everyone does, but we can have an arrogant posture even in our country, because we have the ability to make large wealth, incredible wealth quickly in our nation. And so we think like, look what we have done. And I'm like, you could have that exact same talent and be taken and placed in another nation and make nothing. So 100%. Like we always have to recognize, even in the environment we're in right now, is this incredible opportunity that God has given us. And so like I even think in my own life, the privileges that I've had, I had a private education because we lived in a bad part of Detroit, but I had a private education. I had two parents in the home. Like there were so many things that went into establishing how I think, specifically even in my job, two parents that love the Word of God, love the ministry. My dad's a pastor, mom's in the ministry. So like there's so much that goes into it. And in arrogance, I could go, look what I have done.
Yeah,
and I go, no, look what God has done.
Right. Look how generous he's been.
So generous, right.
Yeah. It was Deuteronomy Chapter 8, and I was looking it up real quick what you mentioned earlier, how earlier he says, do not grow arrogant in that place. Now, let me ask you this. Oftentimes when it comes to our faith, we use a lot of terminology of commitment to God in our hearts. We use a lot of terminology of commitment to God in our words. We use a lot of terminology as far as like, I've let Jesus come into my heart, and he is the ruler of my life. Why the tangible expression?
Yeah, because I would say prove it. And I don't say that in a works-based system.
Right.
You know, like I've always used this because this one analogy that I use. So James says it. So James, the half-brother of Jesus, the book of James, he says, with faith has to be proven through works. Like if you have faith without works, that faith is dead. And so like Paul says, we're saved by faith alone. So we're not saved by works. But James is really defining. So what does it really mean to trust God? It has to impact your behavior. Yeah. So I can't say I trust God if I don't take steps of faith, steps of trust. And the analogy I always use is like, if I tell you, both of you guys, I really love Mary. I mean, I love Mary. And then you find out I don't do anything loving. I don't have kind words. I don't serve her in any capacity. And I'm not even talking about being a jerk to Mary in the sense of I'm not like going above and beyond being rude or whatever. If I don't do loving things, you would go, hey, let's be honest. I could challenge that statement that you actually love Mary, because we know love is always going to be proven through action.
Right.
Is that fair?
Yeah.
It's not just an emotion. And
Right.
I think sometimes in the Christian faith, we reduce our positive feelings toward God to call that faith,
Right.
and say that I'll have faith because we think favorably of God.
Yep.
God would say to us, that's not true faith. True faith
Right.
always, and you cannot miss this, true faith always works itself out through action.
Yep.
So that's what James says. He goes, you might say, you have works and I have faith. He goes, I'll show you my faith by my works.
Yep.
My faith is going to be proven through my works. And so if you don't honor God in your finances, you do not trust God in your finances, period. That's not an opinion of Matthew. That's scripture.
Right.
And so, yeah.
Yeah, I think the word's super clear, and even in regards to how we spend our resources is a clear indication of what we actually believe. Like where your
100%,
treasure is where your
100%.
heart will be also, right?
Yeah.
If I'm allocating my funds, my time, anything that I would consider like a valuable asset, if I'm investing it into the kingdom of heaven, what does that indicate? That's where my heart is. If I'm not, what does that indicate? That's not where my heart is. And in my life, anytime that, when I take a tangible look at how I'm actually spending, if I'm realizing, wow, I've been really frustrated lately. I've been really bummed lately. Am I doing the things that show where my heart is? Am I investing the scarce resources that I have, whether it be monetary, whether it be my time, my prayer, whatever the case might be? If I'm actually investing that, then I feel closer to God. Then all of a sudden I feel like I have a better quality of life. And it comes to true over and over again when we operate in the design that God has for us. Our quality of life is better because that's the way He designed us to operate. And if you don't have those indicators, it's a massive red flag. And I think sometimes people, you talk about specifically about James, and I know that sometimes people hear that passage and they think, well, that means I have to do a bunch of stuff to get into heaven. And that's like the worst thing you could possibly think about it. What it's actually saying is it's flipped. When I have a genuine relationship with God, these things are a natural, organic expression of that genuine relationship. If I actually care about the kingdom of heaven, then I will be investing my resources in the kingdom of heaven. If I'm not, then I don't. Then that relationship isn't there. You know what I mean? So it's not this thing you have to do to receive. It's one of those things of, no, I do because that's where my heart is. That's what I care about. That's my relationship.
Yeah, and again, all these weird things that we've talked about over the last few weeks, those are part of the book of the covenant. It's God establishing a way for the Israelites to connect and relate to Him. These are the kind of the guidelines, the standards. If you want to be in a relationship, this is what we're going to do. And so you get this idea that God has invited them into relationship. He's given them guidelines. And then He says, this is how you show that you're committed to that relationship. How you're going to seal and ratify the covenant necessarily is by doing this tangible thing. And I think about in my life, I have never experienced, I won't say never, the most tangible way that I experience a faith moment with God and I've seen God's provision has been through financial giving.
Sure.
And
I agree. I 100% agree.
There's just something about taking money that we have, handing it over and tithing on it, being generous with it, and then in obedience to what God is asking you to do, at times in tight moments, at times in moments when it doesn't make the most sense, and then still seeing God do miracles. And I don't know that I have as many tangible examples in any other area of my life as I do in our finances, to see God move and fulfill the promises that He's promising right here.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would agree with that, Chris, 100%. And I also have now connected in my own mind and heart the things that God does to bless us that you might not put a monetary amount on it.
Sure.
I still connect to the financial side in the sense that I have given my finances over to God. I honor God in my finances. And so I feel like I'm receiving the blessing in all areas of my life because of that, because there was this critical part. And again, always the context. Look at it. It's one of the first things God always addresses with His people is the concept of financial giving because of what Jesus said. The most important thing, every time I teach on this, I say it, the most important words ever communicated about money were by Jesus, where He said, wherever your heart is, there your treasure is. You talked about it, referenced it earlier. That's the most important thing. So when we look at it, if our hearts and treasure are connected, there's no way to be in a true faith relationship with God without investing your treasure, your resources, your finances into the kingdom of God, into what He's doing. By doing that, I feel God's blessing in every other area of my life.
Yeah. That's actually something, that was the biggest thing I was afraid to talk about when I first got into ministry. Probably two things. I hated talking about giving because it just felt cringy. It's like felt like asking people like, oh, give me your money because like you have a vested interest in the church, and we care so much about the ministry, and it just always feels so needy. And also there's like cultural things with that. Nobody likes asking for money. Like it's like just doesn't feel great. I didn't like asking people to serve at the church either. It felt just as like needy to me. Of just like, come, I used to be so apologetic. Like, I know you got to be out of your way. It's going to be, super sacrificing, but you could just give this one time and like give your time and energy, your talent, whatever the case might be, to serve. And I hated that over years and volume of time and seeing how gracious God has been in my life when I give those things up. It's now one of my favorite things to talk about because exactly what you said, very few things are so tangible. When I am faithful with my finances, I'm faithful with my time, energy, effort, resources, like any scarce resource, I've seen God bless that over and over again. And now it's my favorite thing to talk about. Like, I want to tell you, like, oh, no, you should be serving in your church. Oh, you should definitely tithe. Oh, you should be really generous as well, because I promise it's not because I'm being needy. Like, the very concept that God needs you in the church, it's like, I promise he doesn't. God's really good at stuff. Like God doesn't need to partner with us in anything. It is an opportunity for you to be blessed. I tell that to our worship team all the time. Worship people who do art can sometimes, we're so blessed, our church, to have the most like low maintenance, cool, humble-hearted musicians ever. But even so, it's something we talk about often with our musicians of, you are not doing the church a favor by playing guitar. You are not doing the church a favor. You are submitting to what God asked you to do. And that is a privilege and a blessing that he's allowing you to partner in that. I view finances the same exact way. Like, you are not doing the church, you're not doing God a favor by giving. You're submitting, but to, in what he designed you to do.
And I think that is an important aspect of this. And I want to, so Matthew, you mentioned that you're fairly comfortable with it, speaking about finances, and it seems that you mentioned the tension that kind of revolves around it. You mentioned that you felt sheepish about asking it. Yeah. And we have to acknowledge there have been some pretty cringy things done in the name of God, revolving around finances, and people have misstewarded money, and we see leadership do that. But what I want to say is this, and you mentioned it there, your obedience should not be dependent on another person's obedience. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Very true.
So if someone is some ministry that you've heard about somewhere down on television or whatever, they've mismanaged your money, that does not negate the calling to be obedient.
And let me speak to that for a second, because I this is not an exaggeration to say I am like connected to and even close friends with dozens and dozens of pastors, so ministries around the country. Of all of them, I've never known any of them, the ones I personally know, that have mishandled money or are doing, like, none of the pastors are living in extravagance.
Right.
The televangelists, it makes us, it's gross. It makes us all cringe. Yeah. But that is, you're talking like a percentage of a percentage. And even if you go to the hyper faith gospel, the prosperity gospel, I think most churches have been really bold to speak out and say that's not the gospel. That's not what we're talking about. God does not want every person rich, and you don't have to plant a seed so that God will water that seed so you can be rich. And the pastors who say, like, just envision that car in your garage and stuff like that. Like, that's not what we're talking about. It's so much more beautiful than that. And so all the pastors that I know are frustrated by those false teachers. And so, like, it is unfortunate that we get connected in the same group. But when a pastor talks about money, there's two sides to it. There's a genuine side where giving in the church is so low, typically, in most churches. It's under 10% actually tithe. And so most churches...
3%, most places.
Right, it's 3%. And I bet, as generous as our church is, I bet we're closer to 10. I bet we're closer to 10% of people actually tithe. We have hundreds of people who come every week who don't give, not even a cent, not one penny, whatever. And I'm not bitter about it. But as a pastor, I want to constantly confront our people with truth because I love them. So there's two sides to this. Churches suffer because people don't give, and then people complain that the church has to speak about money. That's completely unfair. If you were to look at the times of Moses, if Moses had to come before the people and say, because you're not giving, we're hurting, that's not Moses' problem. That's the people's disobedience. Okay, so there's that side. But then the other side is the pastors I know genuinely believe these things that the Bible teaches, 100%. And they want their people to be blessed. And that's my heart. I'm thankful because our people give generously enough that we're able to cover all, so far, the vision that God has for us, and we have bigger vision than that. But I also this is so real to me. I want every single person to experience the freedom that comes by placing God first in their finances, because it's not just that their bank account will be better, though I do believe God's blessing will be on it. It's a heart issue that will launch them into deeper levels of faith. There's nothing like giving control over of your finances and then find your finances get better. That just brings a security to you.
That's incredible.
Wow, God is real.
Right.
And I could give you testimony after testimony, my own testimony, that this is so real to Mary and me that we can't help talk about it. So like you guys know Mary. Mary is, I'll say this, and a lot of people are shocked by this. Mary's way more direct than I am. Way more direct, but she just has the demeanor that Mary could blast you and you wouldn't know you're getting
give you the
blasted.
business and you wouldn't know about it.
Yeah, if I'm giving you the business, you know it. You're super uncomfortable. My body language is weird and stuff. But Mary, when she talks to people, like if someone goes, if someone's not a Christian and they talk to Mary, Mary's just blunt. She's again, not exaggeration. She is the biggest evangelist I know. But there's a point to this story. But like if she's talking to someone and they're not a Christian, Mary's first response is, "Oh, you need to go to church and meet Jesus." Right?
Yeah.
Okay. If she's talking to someone and they're like, "You know what? I want to grow, or I'm feeling disconnected," she's like, "You need to get into a connect group." Like immediately. If someone talks about anything financial, she's like, so if they're telling her about their financial struggles, her response is, "You need to tithe."
Yeah.
Okay, why does Mary have that response? Because all three of those truths are so real to her that she loves these people she's talking to enough to go, "Oh, I have the solution.
Yeah.
Here's the solution. Put God first in these major areas of your life, and you're going to discover God's blessing." For her, she couldn't give them any other better advice, because that's the best advice she has to offer. And so that's what I feel like when I see this passion. Like, I know you said you were sheepish about it. I used to be too as a pastor. I was like almost apologetic. And my favorite teacher on finances is Robert Morris. Robert Morris, I was in a small group with him, and he said to this group of pastors, he goes, he's like, "Do you believe the truth?" And everyone's like, "Well, yeah, we believe the truth."
Yeah.
You know, we're all
Yeah,
pastors.
sure, yeah.
He goes, "Do you think God's going to bless it?" And he's like, "Yeah." He goes, "Why are you embarrassed to promote something that would bless your people?"
Right.
And I was like, that's all I needed. And I was like,
Yeah.
absolutely.
It's that Mary Johnson principle. It's like you need to love them enough to share them with the truth. And here's the other part. If you don't do these things, if you don't submit those things to God, if you don't, Mary's evangelistic about it because she's experienced that health. If you don't experience that health, you'll never have that confidence.
Right.
Right.
You'll never be able to minister to somebody that way. Because that's a bold thing to say when someone's talking about financial hurt. Like, "Oh, you should be generous. You should tithe." That's the only way she can do that is because she has experienced her life get better because she submitted to what God told her to do.
For sure.
If you don't do that, you'll never be able to have that confidence. You'll always feel sheepish. You'll always, and that's heartbreaking.
And I don't know how many times, and you mentioned you alluded to it, how many times the financial giving and trusting God and seeing God come through in that has led to other steps of faith
For sure.
in my life, like in other areas. And so if we want to see God move, the most practical, even sometimes I'll say most simple, I won't say easy, the simplest way to begin that process of seeing God move and God fulfill his promises in your life is to start by tithing and by giving your finances.
Yeah, I mean, so any one of us three, and I would say just about anybody on staff and many of our leaders, all of us could give our testimonies, and none of us could give our complete testimony without talking about finances at some point, if not a major point of it, because we had to give that up. Like, so to come here, for me, the church offered me a job. So I was a pastor in Detroit. They offered me the office secretary job at $10,000 less a year. And Mary was no guarantee that she'd be a teacher, because that's her by trade. And because we were moving in July, which is not a great opportunity to find a teaching job for the fall.
Right.
And we never, I'm not exaggerating this, Mary and I never once, not one time, had a discussion about finances when making our decision to come to Lancaster. Because we had so trusted God in our finances by that point, we were like, he'll work that out.
Yeah.
And we never missed a bill. We never were poor. I mean, we were poor in the sense of the standards, but we didn't feel like poverty. And then even then, so 1 year, Mary teaches, and then we had children, so we had Cole, and we just had a value system that we weren't. Mary wasn't going to work; she was going to stay home. And so at that point, I'm not embarrassed to say it. This is 17, 18 years ago now. I made $35,000 a year, and I gave 20% to the church. Because I just so trusted God that I was like, and we were living week to week.
Yeah.
My savings was not going up, never once missed a bill. It wasn't the ideal way to live. I'm not going to lie, in the sense of at that point.
Sure.
Yeah, sure.
But it was still just a faith step that I knew God was going to take care of us. And that has just been a value that has stayed with us from that moment. And everyone, I mean, like when you were interning at the church, you gave up a job to work for free at the church, believing God was calling you in the ministry. And then when you came to that, God took care of you. And to this day, I'm not going to share all of your testimony, but I know there have been seasons of God's extravagant generosity in your life.
100%.
And same thing with you, Michael. Like with we talked about a couple of times ago in your about your house and being able to. Those are those moments that. Those are part of your testimony.
Yeah, forever.
So you would share like, and then this happened, and this happened. And it doesn't mean that we never have financial, all of our vehicles break down. I think all three of ours have been in a shop in the last month or so, But it's still, we just have that confidence. God's going to take care of us, and it carries over into ministry and other areas.
Absolutely.
Well said.
All right, let's get moving. We're 4 verses in, and I
I'm
think
so
we've been
passionate about this topic. I was like,
Right.
in my mind, I was like, guys, you don't need to say anything. All right,
here we go.
Camera.
All right, picking up in verse 5, and you should. Good news is we're going to continue to talk about it. And you shall make response before the Lord your God, a wandering Aramaean. So this is what Moses is commanding the people to say when they give their offering. A wandering Aramaean was my father, and he went down into Egypt and sojourned there, few in number, and there he became a nation, a great and mighty populace. And the Egyptians treated us harshly and humiliated us and laid on us hard labor. Then we cried to the Lord, the God of our fathers, and the Lord heard our voice and saw our affliction, our toil and our oppression. And the Lord brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, with great deeds of terror and signs and wonders. And he brought us to this place and gave us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. And behold, now I bring the first fruit of the ground, which you, O Lord, have given to me. And you shall set it down before the Lord your God, and worship before the Lord your God. And you shall rejoice in all the good that the Lord your God has given you and to your house, you and the Levite and the sojourner who is among you. So we get this now, that not only is it a response of finances, we get a response of worship and a declaration of, hey, this is all that God has done. Now, Michael, I'm going to throw you on the spot because I didn't put this one in the notes.
Sure.
So, but why we have this tangible response of giving the tithe over, but now we have this worship response. Why are the two tied together so important?
Yeah. Well, great question. Worship in its nature is making God the priority in your life. So if you're going to give financially and if you're going to submit to God, but you can still potentially do that and not do it with a happy heart and not do it because your heart's in it. You could do it out of legalism. Doing something out of legalism has never in my life, or empty religious action, brought me fulfillment. In fact, you read over and over again in the Bible, God speaking very harshly when people participate in empty religious festivals or feasts. I taught a message a year or two ago now about Amos and about how they were doing all the religious things that they were asked to do, but they were at the same time robbing from people and persecuting people and treating them poorly. And God literally says, I hate it. I hate your songs. I hate your religious festivals, And in this case, if you're not going to worship, if you're not going to let your tithe be an act of worship or your giving, if you're not going to do it from this heart of I want to serve and submit to God, if you're going to do it from a sense of legalism, then you're not making God the priority. And so having a moment of worship and gratitude and saying, God, this is yours. You designed me for this purpose. I'm submitting it to you. I'm going to do it with it makes, as you're reading, it made me think about something my grandma used to always tell me. She cleaned houses, and she still does. Cleaned houses for years and years and years and years. And I remember her telling me once when I was a kid that when she cleaned toilets, she cleaned it like Jesus himself would use it. She's like, because all of his creation is worthy of that. She's like, it doesn't matter if this is like such a crap job. She's like, I don't care. I will do it to the very best of my ability. Yeah, no joke. But I'm going to do it to the very best of my ability because I'm going to, these people are made in the image of Jesus, whether they recognize it or not, and they're worthy of that. Yeah. I love that servant heart and that idea of if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it well. If I'm going to give with worship. If I'm going to worship, I'm going to do it with a pure heart and a pure mind. I'm going to make God the priority in this moment. If I'm going to do these things, I'm not going to make any great statements of there might be something to be said for a religious act, even if you're not feeling it, of I don't really feel like tithing, but I'm going to do it anyways. I think that's also appropriate. But I love that this is the heart, though, and it's exemplified of, no, the priority right now is this is an act of celebration, not one of loss, because they are so profoundly trusting that God can do greater with what they're losing in their first fruits.
Yeah, worship and true giving have to be connected. In my experience, I would say this would be such a dramatic statement, but I think the people who struggle the most with giving are also people who struggle with worship, because there's a certain level of, again, these are kind of harsh terms, and I don't mean it to be, but it's just my observation is there's a certain level of arrogance in a person that, like, even what Jesus said. So I'll use Jesus' words. That way, if you get mad at Jesus. But Jesus, he admitted that for rich people, it's hard for them to give. He talks about it's hard for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven, and because there's a certain level of arrogance that when you start to be successful, you naturally go, look what I have done. Right. I've done this. And I think the heart of worship is, here's what I've actually done. I've failed God. Right. I have let God down. I'm a sinner.
I've earned death.
I have earned death. Yeah. You have given me grace.
Yeah, so good.
And when you have that heart that says, everything I have is a gift from God, and that's what this is. It's the context of God's deliverance and provision, right? This is what I was talking about earlier. When you bring your gift, in case you're tempted to go, like, but this is mine. Yeah. He goes, oh, here's the context. Here's who you were. Right. You were oppressed and you were broken, and I supernaturally delivered you. I mean, okay, so think about this. Like, I'll give you an example. This is going to be so, I'll use Michael's term. This is going to be so gross what I'm about to say. And if someone ever edits this clip, can really make me look bad, okay? But if I were to say to you, if I were to get up in front of the church and go, here's what I think, and I want to be clear, I don't think this, okay? Sure. I do not think this, whatever camera's on me right now. But if I were to get up and go, the church has been successful. In 10 years, we've seen growth. We've grown in every capacity. I did this. Yeah. I'm an incredible speaker. I am an incredible leader. Like, does it make you uncomfortable? Even though I'm joking, like right now. Like
sure.
And yet, when a person does that in their own job and goes like, you know what, but I'm the one who went to college. I'm the one who did all these things. This is my money. Mm-hmm. It's just as gross as a pastor getting up saying, 100%. I'm the reason why the church grew. You would go, right. No, you're not. Right. It's the same thing. When your own life, when you say, I'm the reason why, you go, no, God's the reason why for all things. He's the giver of life. He put you in this place. He gave you a brain that gave you capacity to think. He gave you physicality so that you could work. He gave you opportunity in the country you live. Like, everything's a gift from God. And so the same way that it's gross for a pastor to say that, it'd be gross for an individual to say that. Yeah. And that's why he's giving you the context. Here's what you were, and here's what I've done for you. Now here's your proper response. Put me first, honor me as a reminder to you, and I'm going to continue to bless you. And that's the context of all of this.
And it takes all of it. Like, I think about in my marriage relationship, I don't want just to serve my wife. I want to serve my wife, but I don't want to just serve my wife.
Right. Yeah, I love the way you said that.
I want to have romantic feelings for my wife. I want my heart to be stirred for her. I want the entirety of my being to be in love with my wife and to demonstrate love for my wife.
And vice versa, right? You want her to...
Exactly, and vice versa. And so it takes the physical, the tangible, it takes the heart work, it takes kind of all of the things that Moses is kind of laying out here, that all of these things are what it takes to really have a true, a genuine, and a life-giving relationship with God. It's going to take tangible acts. It's also going to take heart work and right. remembering what God has done, remembering who we were, remembering how God has loved us. And so I think the pairing of the tangible of these are my finances, these are the things you've given to me, I give them back to you. This is my heart. Right. Remind me and show me who I was and what you've done for me.
Yeah, you said, you're talking about sometimes it might not feel like it. We all have those moments when obedience, it might not be specifically about finances, but it could be about finances, but just in obedience in general, where there are those moments where like, I don't feel like serving, I don't feel like forgiving. Maybe you guys have never had this, but I had this. Mary and I, when we go through seasons where we're finding ourselves more intense and frustrated, and maybe we don't feel as loved, there are times that I have been very frustrated with her and not feel loved. And when I take a step back and think about it, it takes but a split second for me to go, I am as confident as I am of anything that Mary loves me. Yeah. And I can think back of all the stuff. In a moment, my emotions betray me, and I think she's not loving me. She doesn't love me. She's selfish or whatever it might be. And I know she could think the same thing about me. But when I take a step back, I go, wait, no. And it's the same thing. This is with God. There are the moments where we go like, I don't feel like doing it. and we take a step back and go, oh, wait, but God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But God being rich in his mercy. And we, in Ephesians chapter 2. But God, we were all these things dead in our trespasses, but God made us alive again.
Yeah.
God is the one who does us. And if we don't have those moments of worship, I think obedience will always be hard.
Yeah.
Because we just start to embrace our own emotions and our own feelings. And I think we all can agree our emotions and feelings are the worst compass to guide our lives.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I think there's so much power in that discipline. Like, if I let the surrounding situations and circumstances of my life dictate every action, I would be a mess. I'd probably be in jail. Like, we were
Truthfully, you have strong emotions.
I feel
right?
things pretty big. Yeah, we were
Yeah.
just talking about like road rage earlier, and it's just like, people can get like so angry and so intense, and I feel things in such a big way. If I just let myself experience all those things and act on what I'm feeling at any moment, I'd be a mess. I'd probably be divorced, probably yell and berate my kids. I'd probably yell at my employees and my coworkers. I'd be rude. I'd be cruel. And the reality is there's something to be said for the discipline. I think marriage is a great example of saying, even at times when you're not feeling all the romantic affection, to say, what can I do to serve my wife right now?
Yeah.
And that reminder of even taking a step back and realizing the value that has. Who is my wife to me? Who am I to her? What is our responsibility to each other? Even allows me, even in struggle, even in mess, even in chaos, still give to her and love to her in a sacrificing way, even with a joyful heart, even if the surrounding situation is still a mess. And I think financial giving is the same way. You could be like, man, I'm still poverty stricken. Like, I'm still not doing well. I'm still don't know where I'm going to get the money for the bills next month, but I can still give, and I can still do it with a joyful heart, even amidst that chaos. And I think that's where the worship comes in, is correcting your heart space,
100%. All right, on to verse 12. When you have finished paying all the tithe of your produce in the third year, which is the year of tithing, giving it to the Levite, the sojourner, the fatherless, and the widow, so that they may eat within your towns and be filled, then you shall say to the Lord your God, I have removed the sacred portion out of my house, and moreover, I have given it to the Levite, the sojourner, the fatherless, and the widow, according to all your commandment that you have commanded me. I have not transgressed any of your commandments, nor have I forgotten them. I have not eaten of the tithe while I was mourning, or removed any of it while I was unclean, or offered any of it to the dead. Which that is a weird thing, and I still we might have to talk about that. But
I'll tell you what, that's a command I've never been tempted to break.
Yeah,
Deal. Done.
I like that.
In all my research, I found nothing that talked about that. So,
well, that's like Paul one time references the
baptisms of the dead. Yeah,
like, it's never mentioned anywhere else. You're like, I don't know.
Sounds like a metal band. Baptisms of the dead.
Yeah.
I have obeyed the voice of the Lord my God, and I've done according to all that you have commanded me. Look down from your holy habitation from heaven and bless your people Israel and the ground that you have given us, as you swore to our fathers, a land flowing with milk and honey. So what we have here going on is not only are we worshiping in this moment of giving, but he's calling them to essentially create a vow, a promise of, and you could even think about this as like in a wedding ceremony type of ordeal. Of he's saying, promise when you do these things, make this promise that you are going to live by the commands of the Lord. You've been faithful to this. You've not tried to half-heart it. You've not tried to kind of be sneaky about, I'm going to eat a portion of this and then give. So essentially he's saying, make the vow to God that you're going to be committed to him and follow his ways throughout this time. How important is it? And I would say vow giving is probably, making a vow is probably a weird thing in our culture. But how important is it to be purposed about these things that we've talked about and about following after and being obedient to God and upholding him?
It is the most critical mindset you can have. If you don't have a committed mindset of a vow to God, then your emotions will betray you, seasons will betray you, situations will betray you. I'm not exaggerating on this. I really am not. I am very transparent. I struggle in a lot of areas. This is not one for me. Finances. I am never, ever, ever tempted to not give to God his portion because I have such a conviction that this is true. I have such a healthy fear of God. The last thing in the world I'd ever want is God to remove his blessing from my finances. But I have just made a commitment. It is the very first thing. So like I've shared this before, we're paid every other week. When I get the email that alerts me that I have been paid, I do text to giving. I pull up my phone. I have a moment of prayer and thanksgiving to God. I send that number through. It's the first bill I pay. So I mean, it's the first thing I give out of my before I pay any bills or anything like that, because there's this special moment. But I've made that commitment in my heart, and that's what I think some people when you give at the end. So if you don't just give first to God, like the tithe, you'll pay all your bills, and then what you have left over, at that point, fear is governing you, other desires are governing you, and I think you just have to have the commitment in your heart. I am doing this. The same way that, like, I don't have to be reminded that I'm married to my wife. That is a commitment.
Sure.
I am going to be faithful to Mary. I do not flirt with other women. I do not let them flirt with me. I do not talk with other women. I do not go on other dates. I do not, right? Like, those are all things you would go, yeah, obviously that's common sense. Same thing. I'm in a relationship with God, so I've made a commitment. And that is one, like, so for Mary and me, it's not just a commitment that I'm going to give every other week. It's a commitment that my lifestyle is going to be such that allows me to give to God first and generously if he calls us above and beyond to do whatever he calls us to do.
Yep.
So, like, there are some practical things. I'm sharing this for practical side, not to lift myself up in this area, but Mary and I have never allowed our mortgage to be higher than our tithe. And so our number one payment that goes out from our finances, and I'm not saying to anyone else, so that's not a legalistic thing. So if you guys are like, well, that's not us, like, that's not what I'm saying. We just made that a commitment because we didn't want to adjust our lifestyle to such that tithing became difficult for us. Right. And so we were like, you know what, our tithe will never be greater. And so we've committed to at least 20% of giving. So 10% for the tithe, 10% for offering, and to be generous to other people. And so like Mary's, the van she drives is now 7 years old. And not that that's like ancient or whatever, but like we've made a commitment. We're not going to just constantly have new vehicles. My vehicle now is a few years old, but prior to that, it was 14 years old. You know what I mean? Like, we just had a commitment. We bought new furniture this past year for the first time since we had been married, and we just celebrated our 20th year. So we put an addition on our house. So I'm not poor mouthing this. Put an addition on our house. Yeah. But even after the addition, our mortgage is only went up by a couple $100, and because of low interest rates and our good credit and stuff. But you get what I'm saying. Like, the vow is not just every other week I'm going to give to God. The vow is I'm going to live at a lifestyle that doesn't threaten my finances so that I can honor God. Because actually in this passage, we kind of went over it just a little bit. What it's kind of implying is that there's 3 different tithes. There's the first tithe that goes to the Levites that we've seen in Scripture. There's a second one with the festivals that you take in yearly. You have 3 festivals that you go. This is a third tithe that is given to the sojourners and to the fatherless. It's like a special offering to take care of the needs in the community. And I've heard persuasively argued that the reason we don't still have 3 tithes is because now we live in a culture and we have taxes that take care of a lot of these things. I've heard both sides of the argument, but just understand what he's telling them is to live at such a lifestyle that you can honor God with big portions of your giving, not the bare minimum of 10%. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so he's saying, like, this commitment is bigger than just saying I'm going to give to God a tithe. It's a lifestyle.
Right. And if you're not committed to that vow and to that lifestyle, you'll never be successful.
Never.
We just had a conversation.
Anything.
We just had a conversation today about working out. Where it's just like if somebody goes and they work out once a week, twice a week, they'll never like it. Like, I think that's safe to say. If you're out of shape, like, man, I'd love to get into shape. I'm going to go once a week. It's like that once a week.
I'm going to put you on the spot, okay?
Sure, yeah.
Speak about that, because your last year of journey is you made a commitment. I'm going to get healthier, and it's hugely successful for you in this process, but you had to make a commitment in major. I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but I know like you're good for that. And you've seen the success because of that commitment.
Yeah. So that's very generous of you to say. I'm also like still much to go in that process. But that being said, where I found success so far is I decided to make a deal with myself. And I decided to value my own word and my own character enough to not break that deal with myself. So if I said, it started super simple. I think we started working out like twice a week together maybe when it first started last July.
It was like Tuesday and Thursday.
So like Tuesday and Thursday. So I'm like, all right, if I'm going to work out 2 times a week, I need to have enough character and I need to love myself enough to say I'm going to work out 2 times a week. It turns out I still hated it every day for so long. For so long, I would wake up. We weren't even working out especially early, so I can't blame that. We'd have to wake up like 6:30, and
we were working out 7 a.m.
Yeah, 7 a.m. So it's like totally reasonable, But I'd still wake up every day and think like, well, if I call off work, then I don't have to work out. like trying, because I hated it so much. It was such like I just hated it. I hated doing it. I hated the way it made me feel. Then after about 3 months, I realized like, oh, this feels this doesn't hurt as bad. I didn't like it, but I'm like, okay, I'm not looking for excuses now. And so I continued for another 3 months, and then we changed it. So like it was 2 days a week, and now it's like 4 or 5 days a week. And then another 3 months passed, and another 3 months passed, and now it's like if I don't work out, I feel really unwell. Like my mental health takes a hit, my physical health takes a hit. I was just telling Chris, I got back from church camp recently, and for like 2 weeks, I just didn't eat that great, and I was just like I plateaued, and I sat where I was, and I just couldn't get it under control, and I felt gross, and it's because I'm not living up to the promise that I made myself. I was still working out, but I was just, now I have different sets of rules. You change as you go, and it's the same way with generosity. You might start with a tithe, but you might adjust. You might say, well, now I want to be more generous, whatever the deals you're making with yourself that God puts on your heart, it's worth honoring them, and if you don't, you just won't be successful. If it's this half committal, I'll tithe when I have it, you're never going to tithe.
Right.
If it's I'll be generous when I have much, you're never gonna be generous.
Oh, for sure.
You'll never.
That's the biggest lie people tell themselves. If I had more money, I'd be generous.
If I was wealthy, I'd be generous.
That's the number one lie you see when people say, if I won the lottery, I would be more generous. It's like, no, you wouldn't.
No,
because if you're not generous now, you wouldn't be then.
No way. So for me, where I've just had to you have to realize like that commitment and that vow, even when it stinks, and even though I work out a lot now, and I'm like really dedicated to a lot of different things that are helping find success. But to me, if I'm not consistent and if it's not a legit dedication, something like a vow, I know that it won't work because I've spent like 10 years being really out of shape, and I've had those half in, half out moments, and it never, ever, ever works.
And that's what our conversation was today. Was we were looking back, so we've been working out together for a year, and you were talking in the beginning, you hated it. That's what you just shared.
Yeah.
And today we did a workout that all three of us were a part of it, and actually a bunch of our staff. So like today was 15 of our staff are part of the morning workout, but. We ran through the course of the entire workout around 2 miles and did 50 clean and jerks. You did 135 pounds, so you were throwing up some heavy weight. And all of that, and we got done, and we're tired, and then we had a conversation. We didn't feel awful. I mean, we're tired. Don't get me wrong. We're tired and stuff like that.
It's a tough workout, but you're functional.
You're functional. And then we all went, got home, got cleaned up, came to work, and had conversations. And it's like, it's all paying off now for everybody that's a part of that. Whereas a year ago.
Oh my gosh. If I would have done that workout a year ago, I would have thrown up twice. I'm not even kidding. I would have thrown up. I would have
You wouldn't have even come close to finishing it.
No
it would
way.
Have been, And so there is that commitment in your mind. I'm going to do this, and you got to stick to it.
Yeah, I was going to say, and that is the key. Like, if you're listening to this and you're like, I don't know how to start this. I hear what you're saying. I want to do it. The vow really is the most important part at that in that moment of taking those next steps to become faithful in this area of giving or exercise or whatever it is that we're doing. And it's that I commit to doing this, and I'm going to be this because you have been faithful to me.
And in the same way, we're talking about finances. I was talking about my physical health. In the same way that, like I said in the very beginning of this chapter, that like, dude, it's all God's anyways. Like all of your money, everything you have, all of your resources, all of your time, it's just generosity from God. Physical health is the same thing, where it's like, well, this is the body that God blessed me with anyways. So the idea of like, I want to steward over it well. If you can't be committed to that, you're not being committed to what God asked you to do. And I'm not trying to preach about working out. This really is about finances. I just think it really is an interesting, parallel, because it's taking the resources that God has given you, whether it be your physical body, your time or your money. And you have to ask yourself, is my obedience worth it? Is what God is going to do in my life, is the submission to Him worth, that sacrifice? And if it is, you have to do it. It's not easy. It's going to be hard sometimes, and it's going to be a pain in the butt, but like every time it's worth it in my life.
That's so let me be blunt again. I don't know why I even preface that anymore. Like, just make the assumption. But how many people say, I can't get healthy, and then they have a heart attack, and all of a sudden they make a bunch of changes, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to be insensitive, but right, you go like, well, there's something dramatic. Now I make all these changes.
See it all the time.
All the time, right? Same thing in finances. There are people I can't afford to give or whatever, and then right now we have inflation that's so high that many people, I would say their budget on average has gone up 10%.
Yeah.
Would we all agree with that?
And
people just make adjustments to adapt to that. And yet when people say, like, where do I get started, and I can't give 10%, I go, yeah, you can.
Yeah.
Some rare people, it would really, really rock their world. But no, you can't give 10% and keep exact lifestyle.
No, you might have to make adjustments, as we all are right now in the current economy.
Exactly.
You have to adjust.
So like even in our budget, Mary and I are going to sit down. Actually, this week we're going to sit down and look at our budget, because inflation has so impacted it. And now we have 3 drivers, because I have my son's driving, and this is what's crazy. This is total old man stuff. now when my son drives somewhere, in my mind, I'm counting the money in my head. Like, so I figured
Every time
out, like,
they leave the driveway.
well, I figure like if he's going to this location and back, that's at least, I know how many miles per gallon. That's at least 2 gallons. So that's now $10. So I'm viewing his trips in dollar signs, which is so weird.
I hope it's worth that $10, kid.
Yeah, exactly. That's pretty much it. Like, can I go over to my friends? Like, he texted one time recently. He was like, "Can I go pick up my friend from in town?" He was at your house, and he was like, "Can I go pick up a friend from in town?" In my mind, I was like, "That's $10." No, like
You certainly cannot.
That friend's mom can go drop him off.
He's hoofing it, bro.
But I'm just saying, like, so you ask, where do you start? You go, I'm going to start with a commitment that I'm going to do this. Now let me take a step back. What do I need to eliminate to do it? Do I have to eliminate fast food and get out and start shopping at Aldi's and cooking food for myself in order to get that? Then do that.
Yeah.
Because again, for you, not for God, not for the church. Like, don't.
Right.
I don't think I've said one time throughout this thing so that the church can be better. Right.
Right.
It's for you so that you can be reminded of what God can do in your life.
Right. And when inflation goes up, you have no control over it.
Right.
And that's why you do it, because it's not a choice. You just have to adjust.
You have to.
You have to change your mentality when it comes to giving, that you have no choice. Like, this is a vow, it's a commitment. This is not an option, in the same way that you can't just call the U.S. government and be like, fix it. I mean, you could. I don't think it would work. You're like, make money mean more. No, that's not going to happen. So you just adjust and you change because you absolutely have to for survival. That's how seriously tithing should be in your life, and giving and generosity should be in your life, is that, no, this is mandatory to do and to submit to the way God designed me to operate, and the things that he asked me to do is mandatory for my survival. And all of a sudden your money looks a little bit differently, and the way you give it looks a little bit differently. You know?
Yeah. Well, let's wrap these verses up, and I think what you just said is going to really segue into these last few verses and the importance of allowing the sacrifice and the commitment to play out, and why it's important. So, this is the day the Lord your God, one more time. This day the Lord your God commands you to do these statutes and rules. You shall therefore be careful to do them with all your heart and with all your soul. What you just said, Michael, right? You have declared today that the Lord is your God, and that you will walk in his ways and keep his statutes and his commandments and his rules, and you will obey his voice. And the Lord has declared today that you are a people for his treasured possession. I want to read that again. Why do we do these difficult things? Why do we give 10%? Why do we commit ourselves to doing hard things? Because the Lord our God has made us his treasured possession. And he has promised you that you are to keep all his commandments. And he will set you in praise and in fame and in honor high above all the nations that he has made, and that you shall be a people holy to the Lord your God, as he promised.
Yeah, man, I love it. To be purposed in your heart, you have to value it. If you are begrudgingly giving, you shouldn't. I mean, Paul, I think, is the one who says it, that God loves a cheerful giver.
Yeah.
If you are just begrudgingly thinking about finances, I really don't know the value of it. I still think you should obey God. I'm never comfortable to say, well, if you don't want to do it, don't do it. But there's still a part of me that just says, you're missing the value of it. The heart of it that says, everything he just said, here, you make this commitment, and he goes, I'm making a commitment. That's what he just said, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You make a commitment, I'm making a commitment.
Yeah.
Do you want God to be committed to bless your finances? Right? When you word it that way, you're like, yeah. That's the best thing I could ever possibly have. Yeah. And he goes, you know how you do it? Honor me.
Right.
Put me first. The first 10%. And 10% of gross. That's the other thing that people struggle with. And you go, no, the 10%. I'm saying, God, this is what I'm asking. Will you do more with my 90% than I could with 100%? Will you do more? Will you bless it? And God does. And that, again, that's the experience of our church tithes. Even though we don't necessarily have to, but our church tithes. God is super generous to us in that way. All the staff tithe, all of our leaders tithe. It's a part of membership. You have to tithe. And the testimony we hear over and over and over and over and over again is God has been faithful and blessed us.
Yeah, incredible.
Amen. Well, guys, this is a great discussion. I really appreciate it. We've probably gone a little bit longer than we typically do, but wonderful discussion. And I pray that this has stirred something in your heart. If you are someone who has given on a regular basis and you've done this, you've made this commitment, you give with a worshipful heart, then I pray that you continue to experience the blessings of God's promise to you, to walk in relationship and to be your God and provide for you. If you've never experienced that and this is something new, I would encourage you, take this to heart, pray about it, and then make that vow, that commitment, and just start doing it.
And if your finances are in disarray, we have financial counselors to help you.
100%.
We don't just preach the truth and then say you're on your own.
Good luck.
Right.
Yeah, it's in every area. Here's the truth, and we're here to partner with you in relationships to help you. And we have financial mentors that are trained to help you get a budget and to walk you down that pathway. So again, make that commitment, and if you need help, seek help. We would love to help out.
100%. Well, thanks for joining us again, and we will see you next week. Well, thank you so much again for joining us today. Just like Pastor Matthew said, if you are in a place where you're trying to make the commitment to God, to be faithful with your finances, to maybe even be faithful with serving, we do have resources that we can help you with. And so if you would be interested in finding out more information about financial mentors, or finding a place where you can serve, where you can learn to make those vows, those commitments to God and the things that He's calling us to, we would love to help you. You can reach out to us at info@Tree.Church and just put a little note in there about what exactly you're looking for in the subject line, and we will get back with you as soon as we possibly can to help you on this journey. Because again, the beautiful thing about the promises of God, even though He asks things of us, the beautiful thing is it's never just to sacrifice. God is always asking us to be obedient because it leads us into further trust and love and enjoyment of life with Him. So I pray that this was a challenging discussion for you, and that it will lead you to more and more steps of faith. Thank you again so much for joining us, and we pray you have a great week.